you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the big show. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for being here. As always, the Chris Voss Show is a big family that loves you, but doesn't judge you, at least not as harshly as maybe some other people in your family. We're this family that's just loving and joyous and huggy. Unless you're evil, then we might put you in the back in children's table for a little while. So learn to be better. But that's what's so great about our show. We have these amazing people on the show that come talk about their stories, their adventures, their journeys, the things and lessons they've learned in life to let you know that, number one, you're not alone. Number two, how maybe they figured out how to figure out life so that you can figure out life too. And the stories, as we always say, are the owner's manual to life. We have another brilliant gentleman on the show with us today. Mike Kuczkowski is on the show with us today. We're going to be talking to him about his experience, his insights, his company, what he does, how he founded it, and all that sort of great stuff. Leadership, entrepreneurism, how to build better companies, all that good stuff. Mike has more than 25 years experience in communications, management consulting, journalism, and politics. In 2014, he founded Orangefiery. I was going to do what we were joking about earlier with the mispronunciation. Orangefiery, a firm that combines strategic consulting and communications to help clients solve business problems and drive change. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you?
Doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Do we get all the pronunciations of Orangefiery and Mike right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a connection between the two. You wouldn't want to name a firm Kuczkowski Partners, so we chose to go a different direction. I just didn't anticipate that the fiery would be a stumbling block for folks either.
You know, everyone's got a different way of pronouncing everything, as I found from all the guests we've had on the show. So give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Just orangefiery.com, which is, like it sounds, orange the fruit, FIERY.com.
There you go.
Use that same name to find us on LinkedIn and Twitter and other places.
There you go. So an imagery would be, it's oranges on fire. Maybe.
It's kind of a funny story. So I literally did want to avoid Kuczkowski Partners because I would never be found by anybody if I was doing business under my surname. And I'm a big fan of the James Joyce book Ulysses, and so I'm literally flipping through pages to find a word that hasn't been used. And I stumbled on Orangefiery in a passage that had to do with communication, so that seemed to fit. And then the URL was available, which is a key thing in organizational naming, as I'll tell you, since we do naming.
It's hard to get the names anymore because all the good names are taken, and
exactly.
It seems like every name's taken. Like you just have to make up a name.
There's some broker anticipating that you're going to start Chris Voss Consulting 2024, and they probably would charge you $5,000.
Here, let me go on GoDaddy real quick. So give us a 30,000 overview. What you do there at your company?
I mean, just to give it, if I can, a little more background on me. I was a journalist for about 6 years and worked in politics for 2. I often joke that the second part should count longer because it's like dog years being in politics. But the last 25 in PR agency life. And, I saw an opportunity. Everybody in communications is often trying to change what companies are doing. Right? I don't want to do the PR thing. I want to tell them how to organize themselves. And that's actually a pretty hard thing to do, is to span that gap. So we started up a management consulting approach to help companies do both, right? Figure out what's the thing. Communications is such a dominant part of having a successful company nowadays. And so if you're, in touch with people, you have insights from stakeholders and you can weave that into your corporate brand, your corporate strategy. That's a good starting point. And then the execution becomes that much more straightforward. And you don't have a bunch of PR people second guessing you later.
Oh, that's always good to have those PR people second guessing you. Give them something to do, all that good stuff. Let me ask you this: what prompted you to launch this company? What was your life journey like that you were going through in life, and what motivated you want to do that?
It's kind of funny. I mean, I had been a senior executive at a big PR firm and watched it grow. And I had a particular point of view about this connection between consulting and really doing research-based work on messaging and branding and stuff like that, and having that be the centerpiece of a business. So I started up a business within that bigger PR firm And, I thought we were doing great work, but we weren't profitable. We had like 3-year runway to be profitable. And, the bosses of me at that time were like, nope, we really can't have red on our ledger. We want to make sure that we're profitable right away. And so there was a decision to, abandon that. But I really liked the business. It was a good conversation with clients. People seemed to get it. People seemed to understand how important communication strategy, public affairs strategy, all these different, sort of silos of communications within their organization were to shaping their future. I did a couple more years at that place and ran one of their offices on the West Coast. And we sort of both decided it was time for me to go try the thing I really wanted to do.
There you go. And you founded the company and off you go. What was the hardest thing you found when you started your company to try and do? Was it getting clients or learn entrepreneurism or?
I think I'd gotten a really good schooling in a number of aspects of this where I worked previously. So I'm grateful for that part. I think, understanding how to get enough clients to make the business work and how to kind of, balance talent, having the right people and enough of them to get the work done. There's a lot of ups and downs in this business. So cyclicality. And when I have a tendency to be a little bit more, I would say, a serial monogamist, I'll go and get a client and get very deep in with them and really take them on a journey and from strategy to execution. And then, at some point they won't need that anymore or something will change. And then I'll have to go find another piece of business to work on. And that's the way it's been working. I need to get better about lining up a pipeline, but we're not big on client churn. We really value those relationships. And so that's kind of the biggest learning and struggle is it's really good to be getting new business while you're doing business and growing in that way. And it's not always easiest to do.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I mean, the scalability of the business, as it were.
Yeah, it's human capital, right? So that's hard to scale. You need really smart people, and you need to be able to kind of, bring them in and move quickly.
And then being able to juggle task and demand, and it's the fun game it's the fun part of being an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that make the mistake where they what is it? 80% of it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of your clients will bring in 80% of your revenue. And so you can end up very quickly relying on your top revenue things. And if somebody dips out that's in that 20%, it can be quite painful if you don't have a replacement lined up or in development. And so a lot of people don't know, the whole process of developing a new person to another thing. So your company deals with a lot of things. It looks like you work with leaders and teach leadership. Let's get into some of that, if you don't mind. What are you seeing some of the issues are that leaders are facing or that leaders maybe need to face these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think leadership's it's something that's very easy to critique from a distance, and it's always been a fascinating subject for me over the years. I think getting closer and working more closely with people in the C-suite of organizations, you get a sense of exactly how high pressured their jobs are and how complex their jobs are. I think it's said, and I don't have data to disagree with it, that it's probably as volatile and complex an environment for business executives as we've ever seen. Change is constant. There's a fair amount of turnover in the CEO suite and lots of others. So you got to figure out how to operate on a pretty short time frame to get things done. And I've certainly seen that more as I've worked with more of those types of leaders. Mm-hmm. And it feels like you have to hit the ground with a sense of vision and really kind of forge that vision. Particularly if you're coming in new to a company, there's an existing history. You got to get your brain around that, and then you've got to figure out, what am I going to do that's going to make an impact? And if I'm honest, like, the biggest thing is don't wait. Like, you have a chance to make an impact probably more in your first 3-4 months than you ever will in the span of your time with a company. And so working on that basis with people and trying to figure out what are the right moves, how do I, find some early wins, but keep my eye on the things I really think are important over time. Those things are essential. You've got to do that.
Most definitely. When you do come into leadership, there's so much you kind of have to address. And I don't know, I imagine you consult with people to tell them this, but, you've got to address what the old culture was, what maybe new culture you want to establish under your reign of power. That's a narcissist in me. And dark triad traits are fun. I love them. But what you want to establish, maybe you want to, maybe you have to do a reset because you're coming into a disabled situation that, things haven't been working well, and you're the guy that they bring in to save everything. So, you've got a hard reset that you got to somehow try and do or signal to things that there's definitely new leadership. It's not the same old. What are some other factors that you advise people in coming in those positions for?
I think it's important. And, we work with a lot of folks who are, new in either like a chief commercial role or a chief corporate affairs role or a CEO. I think listening in the first 90 days is a really critical piece. It's kind of underweighted in our culture, but
what?
Yeah, no, exactly. No, but I have
to do that, Joe.
There is the demand for people to come in and have the answers, and that's kind of impossible. Going around and trying to talk with people inside a company and outside of a company. Very often we can help with that as consultants if we get in on the early front, just to really hear what's being said and synthesize that and try to turn it into something that can be discussed with a leadership team. I don't think there's this mythology about business decision making, and I think a bit of a mythology about leaders that they just come in and clear cut things or have some pearls of received wisdom and off they go. You got to really spend some time understanding a place in order to change it.
Definitely, yeah. It's, technically you need to set change from the get-go. But you've got to also ascertain. Do you think that people, before they officially take a position or it's announced, they need to do that study and try and figure out, what really needs to be changed? Maybe that's part of the discussion they're having with the board before they come in.
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of the interview process is what are you going to do if you take the reins of this company? But, sometimes those can be internal candidates and they have to figure out how do they show up differently on the day when they've taken the mantle. And sometimes they're coming in from the outside and they also have to, tread somewhat carefully, being perceived as an outsider who's going to change everything around. There's usually, you talk about 80-20 rules. There's usually quite a bit going right in a company, even if it's not necessarily apparent. Mm-hmm. And figuring out how do you amplify those things and how do you address the things that are standing in the way of success. It's much more nuanced than you might think of, okay, here's my strategic plan, plop it down on the table, follow that roadmap, and I'll check in 3 months. That's not really the way leadership works these days.
Yeah, it's, I liken it to where sometimes people will use leadership, they come into power and they put out a PR notice. We're changing. We're going to be moral and ethical and trustworthy and upstanding from here on out. And then, 3 months later, there's all sorts of unethical stuff happening at the CEO, maybe boardroom level or something. And you're like, wait, I thought we were going to be ethical. That, or maybe it's the whole thing of we're going to support our employees. We love our employees. They're our number one thing. Now we have layoffs of 10,000 people coming next week. Yeah. That's sort of PR BS that you're just like, whatever. One thing you talk about is a common mythology of what good leadership looks like. Tell us what that means.
I think we have a mythology around a type A leader that we kind of what we've been discussing a little bit, that somebody comes in with the answers and just leads from the front, and that's kind of the way it is. We talk a lot about leading from a place of vulnerability, because actually, with things being as they are, attributes like listening, attributes like trying to figure out, win-win situations, attributes like being able to show empathy to people when you're laying off however many people you may need to lay off. These are business realities. Not every business is right-sized for its market. And sometimes those are things that you actually do have to do, and it doesn't represent sort of the black corporate soul at work. But it can be done in ways where you're able to bring empathy to that. You're able to explain things in a way why they're happening, and you're actually able to do it in a way that's supportive. We had one of our clients had to do a round of layoffs, and we were talking with them about that decision, and I can't remember whose idea it was. It might have been theirs, but we activated sort of a LinkedIn resume book that anybody who was being let go by the company could voluntarily, right, because you can't mandate it, but contribute to this. And the company, because it was right sizing for its operations, again, a layoff being nothing bad happened from the employee standpoint. Let's get the word out about these great employees. Let's make sure people know the talent's available. Let's put them out in our networks, because we can do that in a unique way nowadays and take advantage of it.
You really can. It's quite nice. I think it's exemplary when companies try and get people hired or filled. Call up your competitors, and I don't know. Would you want your employees to go to your competitors you laid off? Maybe not.
I think you probably would if there's an opportunity there. The notion of competition's got, if you're not succeeding at something, you got to do some soul searching. If your competitors are beating you, you have to figure that out. They're probably going to go to your competitors anyways.
Yeah, this gives me a Trojan horse idea. So instead of doing layoffs, you pretend like you're laying them off, but you keep them on some sort of subsistence salaries, and then you send them your competitors, so they'll just go sabotage them with the poor work they were doing at your company.
I think there might be some SEC violations in there, but sure,
yeah, there might be.
Give it a try.
Might be. I mean, Steve Jobs pulled that one cool trick where he got everybody in Silicon Valley to limit people's hiring and pay. They did get sued, but he was gone by then. He seems to have survived it with his reputation. But no, yeah, there's probably some sort of. I have some Machiavellian problems. Can you tell?
I can tell.
Yeah. But they're healthy in some ways, unhealthy in others. So one other thing you talk about is how leaders can see better around corners. That's the thing I think as leaders we're always trying to do. We're trying to see the future. We're trying to see new innovations. We're trying to see, we know there's usually a limited run of whatever we built is going to, run profitably for a short while. And then there's going to be market changes or politics changes. Sometimes there's going to be personnel changes, financial changes. There's any one number of things that can hit you: crisis, PR failures. There's a million ways to die in this business now. So how can leaders see better around corners? How do you define that too, and seeing around corners? I give you my definition.
I mean, I think it is about sort of, an active listening mindset and really kind of thinking about the horizon line and the out, who in your organization has a touch point with stakeholders out in the world. If you spend most of your time in the hallways of corporate offices, you're unlikely to see where the future is coming from, and to be able to see around corners. It's just you're not getting that info. So I think some frequent touch points, some frequent interchange with stakeholders that you may not see in boardrooms or in your corporate offices is really essential. And then trying to aggregate that, I wrote a lengthy piece a couple of years ago about Disney under Bob Iger and how much it changed its business in sort of the 2018, 2017 era around customers and really thinking about the customer experience. I think Bob Iger saw some massive changes and started to think about a different org design. And it was really critical to kind of navigating some of the things like streaming that were happening, launching the Disney Channel, investing in the MLB.TV so that they had some real technology chops when it came to streaming and the like. And it set them up for success, but it wasn't something that he was getting from his direct reports who were running the business. It was something that he was able to see, I think in part because he was, really tuned into what was changing in technology that impacted his business.
Oh, wow. So the technology aspect of it.
I think technology is hugely disruptive. I mean, we talk a lot about AI, right? And, pretty soon you'll be able to replace me with some. But the degree to which we are still in the very early stages of what that's going to look like and how much of a market there's going to be around the hardware, software, and services related to AI, it's going to be pretty transformative for our economy. And so that'll disrupt a lot of things. Probably not in the ways we expect it to, but it'll definitely make a lot of change happen.
Yep. I don't know. It'd be interesting what AI replaces me. I mean, it's going to have to be something that smells bad and has a really poor attitude. I don't know what that
I'm
means.
Sure they're working on that in some robotics.
It probably is. Yeah, there's probably any week now. The other thing you talk about is how leaders can and need to align employees on corporate strategy. What's that look like in trying to get that alignment done, and get that vision out there? I've always been a vision guy, so I've always been out soapboxing for vision and strategy and getting employees and vendors and boardroom and investors and everybody, aligned on, this is where we're going with the ship.
Yeah, it's a bit of a dance, to be honest with you. But I think alignment is one of the most critical things that a leader can bring to an organization, right? Getting people on the same page. You have to sort of start with defining the problem that you're facing. And that was another thing Iger did really well. He got his team together and said, I think we have this problem. We're very invested in the traditional model. Streaming's coming. It's changing. We're not going to get the revenue from cable we used to. We got to get ahead of this thing. And I do think that, if you can define a problem, and we find it's very useful to do it with a narrative thrust, right? Here's what we see, and ask a team of, pretty well-informed folks to kick the tires on that, break it down, reconstruct it, really put their own stamp on their definition of the problem, a lot of alignment will follow. People will be, agreed that we've done a good job of running this to ground, of characterizing this. We can sort of put it down in 3-page memo or something like that, something everybody can kind of look at. And then, from there, you can drive the right kind of action because it's well informed, it's well constructed. It kind of reflects the reality people feel instead of that, that sort of boilerplated strategy that you're like, oh, this is the same thing we saw last year. Oh, it's rinse, wash, repeat, kind of thing. When you can do that, I think people get energized, right? When they think their leadership is really kind of dealing with reality and the stuff we need to run to ground. I think that has a lot of power. And so that's what we kind of encourage people to do. It's a really gratifying process. Sometimes it's the person in the room who's kind of the most cantankerous and has a really difficult view of things. When you can get them around to, oh, this is actually real. We're going to talk about the stuff we don't always talk about and try to tackle it. I think it really can be very productive.
There you go. What about building trust and maintaining trust? I mean, how do we do that? You kind of alluded to a little bit of that, but what's the key as a leader to keep that trust factor?
I think, Chris, it's a lot about what you do instead of what you say. To some degree, if you can do things that you're not necessarily talking about, but people will find out about somehow, that they will, if they are interested in your company, they'll discover what you've been up to or how you've been doing it. We're in kind of a deeply transparent era, whether you like it or not, right? So people are going to find out what you said at the Kiwanis Club, and they're going to find out what you did with, some industry coalition, and they're going to find out what you said in an employee town hall meeting. And so the degree to which that's all sort of like, you know that, and then you can kind of lead with that in mind. But really, trust is about behaviors, I think. It's about doing the right thing, doing things that are aligned with your core purpose, and making sure that you're playing that back to people, that they know, if I stand for X, that I'm actually going to make decisions based on that instead of that being a nice shiny thing on the front of the building.
There you go. That really hits it on the head. I tried talking about this in my book where, you've got to walk the talk, and you can't just put out PR memos of we're ethical now and then behave unethically. They're like, why is the CEO in Vegas with cocaine and blow and hookers? I thought we were being ethical this week. That sort of thing. And, it's walking the talk and being that vision. What do you think about servant leadership? I'm writing about servant leadership in my new book, interviewing CEOs. It seems like a lot of that in building trust with people comes from having that servant leader sort of mentality.
Yeah, I think that's consistent with what we talk about when we talk about, vulnerability as a new model for leadership as well. Yeah. I think there's great stuff in the servant leader model. I really do. I don't know, I'd be curious how people are reacting to it now. I know that was sort of a thing that we were talking about, several years ago, and it seemed like there's always a little bit of a backlash. I don't know what you're, hearing from folks, but on the one hand, we want to put this face forward, and then sometimes the pressure from investors or the pressure from different stakeholders can be, no, you got to stand up, you got to take a stand, you got to do X, Y, or Z, and I feel like that stuff it just has to be super consistent, right?
Yeah. To me, I what I see a lot of it is like listening and walking the floor, listening. Like I watched Hewlett Packard's CEO and what he does with his day, and he does a lot of walking and listening. I think Bob Iger does too. Just touching with people and basically checking in with them, and letting them know that you care, that you listen. I think people get a sense, regardless of how authoritarian or Machiavellian you are, like someone like me, people still get somewhat of a sense that I care, which amazes me because I don't. No, I'm just kidding.
It's interesting because I come at things, at least historically, I started my career, I'm like, oh, if you build the perfect communication system, Chris Voss won't refer to it as bad PR. It'll really work, right? And it'll help organizations be more effective and just generally better. And every time you look at this, different researchers have looked at this, the role of a leader is such a critical component in all this. Like they tried to separate this out. If we have a strong internal communication system, we have a leader, and they're kind of unrelated. They're not. So having a leader that sort of it participates in the kind of leadership by walking around, but also in some of the internal communications activities, town hall meetings, other things, whether it's an employee newsletter and the rest of it, that you can kind of see where's their thinking, what's their action that supports it, and the rest of it. Am I on track? That internal communication system it's only as good as the leaders involved in running the company.
Yeah, and I like running my own internal communication system, and I find what I have to communicate is not an I company message. It's like, yeah, I'm leading, and here's what I'm doing, and here's why this is important to you, and this is why this serves the community or the company, and I'm not just being an authoritarian person stomping out this or that. There's a reason behind it, and here's why. And I've always kind of done that where I explain things to people so they understand the reasoning behind it. So I'm just not barking orders at people or, correcting people. It's, here's why we don't do this. Does this make sense to you? And I find that works a little bit better for me.
100%. I mean, it's the power of we versus the power of me, right? And the piece of that is key is, and we have some other things that we do to try to help with this, but can you really do I have a good narrative, or do I have a good foundation for understanding why my boss is making those decisions or why my leader is leading in this way? If I have a good mental model of that, it's called sense making, right? And we're always using sense making. Like, people are smart. I'm a big believer in that. You find a lot of contrary evidence to that claim, but like, I grew up in a working class family. The conversation around the dinner table was not so unsophisticated as all that. And, give people credit for not being foolish about the things that they see and how they interpret it. Mm-hmm. And I think we're all kind of endowed with a certain amount of sense-making behavior whenever an organization changes. And we'll test it out. Is it legit, or is it selfish behavior on the part of leadership?
Yeah.
If I saw that the CEO got a big pay raise or cashed in a bunch of stock right before he did something that was, or she did something that was problematic, I'm not going to sit idly by and think, oh, what a wonderful coincidence. I'm probably going to critically look at that,
Yeah, maybe he'll invite me on the boat. Part of it is too, it's kind of an interesting psychology that I have behind it that I really should sit down and define more. But part of it is communicating that what I'm doing is important for the community, and it's just not about me, because people can read that into stuff. They can be like, he's doing this to help the company be more profitable. The bigger thing of it is we can ensure the success of the corporation. We can secure the long-term employment if we make these changes that sometimes may be painful, but this is for the good of the community. And then part of it is too, I think it's always been important to me, is showing that I'm a good judge. And I think some of that is signaling that I'm a good leader. And I think I do a lot of that signaling when I talk about what I'm interested in. Because if people know that you're a good judge, that you're fair, you might be strong, you might be, when it comes time, you got to whack something, you're going to whack it. But they know that you're fair, that you have and I think of myself sometimes as just a judge sitting on a bench. I like kind of watching judges in courtrooms on TikTok. And they see someone who's going to be measured, who's going to try and make good decisions, and they know that if they get in front of that firing line by accident, that there's a good chance they're going to get a fair hearing. And some of that is built into my psychology of what I try and signal. Basically, I think what I'm doing overall, you're getting me to think about this more than I have recently, but more than anything, I'm trying to signal that I'm a good leader, and then I have all the different aspects of a good leader. And I think that embodies trust and emboldens trust.
I think the notion of signaling is really important, right? And I think it has an effect. We talk a little bit about the fallacy of business decision making. And again, the notion of that, like when I was coming up, I kept waiting because I didn't grow up in the world of business. So I kept waiting for someone to say, all right, so you just got promoted. Here's a key to the secret conference room where we all figure out what's going on and make decisions. Yeah. And you sort of wait for that moment. You wait to be like let in on how things go. And in fact, decision making is messy, and there's a lot of inputs, and there's a lot of lack of clarity. And ultimately, I think business decision making is best framed when it's kind of looked at as an experiment. We think X is true. We think this is the problem. We're going to try this to deal with the problem or capitalize on the opportunity that problem creates. We're going to watch how it goes, and if we are wrong, we're going to course correct. This is how we do it. But good leaders are often checking that with the people who are cleaning the conference room as well as the people who are participating in that. Checking it out, testing their hypotheses, doing some signaling. And if you get feedback while you're signaling something, a decision you're about to make, I know you're going to think more about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do I have that right? Did I hear that? I hadn't considered that angle, you know? Yeah. And it's sort of this active, dynamic process that is not, you know, kind of like typey. I made my decision. I'm going to issue
here's the edict, memo. And everyone will go forth in the same march, right off the cliff. Sometimes I like that, because that is what I'm doing. Sometimes when I'm signaling, is I'm doing basically small scale focus groups.
Exactly right.
And I'm surprised that sometimes I'll be pushing an idea and I'll be about 75% sold on it, and I'll be signaling that this is the turn we may make. And I'll get feedback, and I'm like, I'm in my own private Idaho on when I think this is a great idea. I'm like, whoa, wait, what? And then from then I'll get other data that makes me go, oh, okay, that's not a good idea at all then. But yeah, doing that pre-signaling and stuff. But yeah, to me, a lot of what I do is I'm always, if there's a chance for me to wave a little flag that says, here's what we're doing, and we're doing this because I'm a good leader, without coming off as, you know, completely narcissistic and Machiavellian. It is, but just explaining things to people, you know, like I said, I always explain stuff to people, the reason why. Part of what we did is we'd explain to people the reason why we do things is so that if they could find an innovation that we hadn't overseen, they can understand the process that we developed to make it and how to go from there. Yeah. So let's move over to your company. Let's talk about it.
Actually, could I pause 1 second?
Yeah, please.
So you reminded me of a study we once did that was, I thought, kind of eye-opening, because we were asked to help redo the intranet for the like the internal website for a major pharmaceutical company. And we did a bit of we did focus groups, we did some research, we did some benchmarking against other companies, but we wanted to check and see what was the information people wanted most out of the, intranet, and what did they get? And of course, people wanted to know, how am I doing against my own goals? Am I going to get a bonus? What's my gap? That sort of thing. Absolutely, they do want that information. And if you can engineer it to get it to them quickly, readily, that's awesome. But what surprised us was the top piece of information they most wanted was about corporate strategy. How's the organization doing? What are we doing broadly, not just in the sales organization, but broadly? Like, what's our strategy for capitalizing what we got, thinking about the future, all that stuff. And they felt like what they got most of the time from their organization didn't really deliver on that. And that just speaks to what you said, right? It's like people are more curious than you might think about the overall health of their organization, about how how leaders are thinking about the future, how they're dealing with it, what kind of innovation they're kind of trying to drive. And so there's real value in thinking about those things, even though some people might be like, no, we got to narrow the frame. Just give them the info that they need. Send them the bulletin on what to sell, right? That sort of thing is actually counter to effective leadership when it comes to the communication side.
It's interesting to me how people seek out leaders. I mean, I still think everyone can be a leader. I certainly grew up an introvert and wasn't very leaderly when I was young. And so most of the skills I developed where I kind of had to, and I kind of learned, I read Harvard Business Review when I was 18, started taking some of their courses and manuals and stuff. And so I prepare myself, but still, I mean, there's a lot you just experience in going through it and become a leader trial by fire, if you would. But it's interesting to me, there's a lot of people who look for leaders, and there's more of that than there are people who want to lead or who feel comfortable leading, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny because I talk a lot about failure, which is not a topic that a lot of some leaders do not like talking about failure at all. But I feel like most have learned more from it than you would, expect, or that you might think from the outside looking in. And I remember internally in an organization once I was asked, so you talk about this so much, Mike, why don't you lead a panel discussion about failure and its upside, right? What's the upside of failure? And I think I had 3 people from the organization. One of them simply could not say the word out loud. Right. It was just beyond her interest in doing that. It always had to turn it around into a win. And I think there's, look, we all try to do the best we can when things go south or when we experience failure. But, some of the stuff that I'm sure forged your abilities as a leader was the things you tried that didn't work out, either for things having to do with how you came up with it or
there's
things.
A few of those.
Yeah. Look, you're not alone. I mean, that's what most people say. And then that doesn't make it into the autobiography. But although in some cases it does. But that's, really, that's something very meaningful for people to see. As a leader is someone who kind of picks himself up after failure, learns what you can learn from it, discards the stuff that you can't really take forward, and keeps chugging.
There you go. There you go. So let's talk about your company and what you guys do. What sort of clients can look to onboard with you guys? Do you guys have some minimums of people you want to work with?
Not really minimums. I mean, we do have, there's a point at which if you don't have the budget, it doesn't work. But
I got $5.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. You can subscribe to one of our newsletters, I'm sure.
There you go. I'll do that.
But no, in point of fact, we work with companies that are small and even starting up, companies looking for seed money, which, it's kind of hard to do because they don't have a lot of cash. But, once they've got a little bit, we'll help them with an early stage website, a brand, an investor presentation to go get more funding, that sort of thing. We'll work a lot with companies who don't yet have commercial products, but who are kind of seeing the pathway to that. Lots of times in the pharmaceutical industry, but also could be elsewhere, where they've got several rounds of funding, proof of concept, things are moving in the right directions. And, they're like, oh, I see the goal, but the goal actually means that I got to get to know patients and caregivers, or I've got to understand my markets better. I've got the widget really figured out, but I have to figure out now what's my commercial strategy going to be. And we help them. And then larger companies, very often, whether it's corporate social impact and some of the sense of, how am I living my sort of corporate purpose and mission today, and how do I think about that from a philanthropic standpoint or from a stakeholder engagement standpoint. We often come into very mature companies and can help them on things like that, or things that they're doing that require a little bit of different thinking about, marketing or communications and how to build the right system.
There you go. Now, you guys have a lot of capabilities listed on your guys' website. You guys do a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
I need you to list them all off the top of your head. No, I'm just kidding.
I'd probably fail that test, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'd probably fail just reading it. It's a lot. So there's corporate brand strategy, market development, services, strategic planning. I'm just going to skip through the things I like. Optimizing communication functions, crisis management, disease awareness. Have you guys seen Twitter lately? Product communications. Thought leadership. There's my favorite right there. Thought leadership, communication programs, lots of different corporate and developmental stuff there. What else might we know? Like, how can people onboard with you? How do they work with you or find out if they're a good fit?
They can just reach out to us. I mean, the contact info is on the website. And as of last week, we'd managed to get all that stuff so it doesn't get stuck in our spam filters. So that's a good thing.
That's always a good thing.
And look, Chris, I want to explain how can, we're a pretty lean organization. Let me put it that way, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've got a theory on communications that allows us, and strategy that allows us to kind of take this approach. And if you got a problem with brand strategy, we do branding. That's great. But if you've got a problem with your go-to-market, we have a market development approach. If you've got a organizational change initiative that you've got to get done, you're reorganizing around new business units, you got to get people on board with that. Like the similar problem definition, what are we doing? What's our vision? What's our goal? And then how are we getting it done? We can sort of point that approach to a number of different problem sets and have success with that. When I was just starting the company, I had this big flip chart paper and I said, here, we could do this, we could do this. Most of the things you listed off were on that list. Mm-hmm. And then by about year 4, we'd actually done many of them. And I was like, okay, so the theory holds. And it's been really productive work.
Okay. Cool. So it sounds like you guys customize stuff really well. You can hone down to just about whatever a company might need.
That is one thing that you should know. Anybody who wants to work with us should know. It's like we're going to want to make sure that we're involved in figuring out what we're doing and why. It's not something off the shelf. We don't have a stable of people smiling and dialing media relations wise, like you might expect at certain PR firms. And that's, that's all good. But we definitely are trying to do something that, let's say we want to work on the toughest problems our clients have. So let's put it that way.
There you go. And fix them. So thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Give us the .com one more time as we go out.
Yeah, it's orangefiery.com. Orange, ORANGEFIERY.com.
There you go. I think you should have an orange mascot who runs around and it says fire shooting at the back of the orange.
That would be like Otto, the mascot of Syracuse University, where I got my undergraduate and graduate degree.
Oh, fun. He just follows you everywhere.
Exactly.
When you go places. So
we welcome it.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, Mike. Thanks for audience for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss, one of the TikTokity. You can buy me a cup of coffee at buymeacupofcoffee.com/Chris Voss. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. That should have us.